set up the PowerPoint. So it'll just be one moment here. All right. So if I could get verbal confirmation just from one student, doesn't matter who it is. Can you hear me okay? Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can hear you good, Professor.
Awesome. Awesome. So this is this PowerPoint, this lecture, it's going to be about advanced drafting strategies and tactics. Um, and this is kind of a um, more intense look at the drafting stage. If you go back to Unit 2 and we look at that PowerPoint, we primarily focused on stages 1, 2, and 3. So we didn't even touch the drafting portion of the writing process at all. All we focused on was preliminary thinking. We dove very deep into the researching process, and then we touched on thesis statements and outlines at the end. Everything aligned with all the assignments up to this point. Now, what we have to do here, we have this important task ahead of us, and it's the Unit 7 final essay. And what are we going to do here? Essentially, we're going to transform that outline into a full fledged, fully developed essay. And this essay needs to be 13 to 1500 words, which is, that's a pretty moderate length essay to be writing in college. And there's going to be a couple other points that we're going to talk about throughout this entire PowerPoint. But the key things that I want to talk about are breaking down paragraph structures in depth. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the movement of ideas and how we can control the movement of our ideas using transitional words and phrases. And if you were with me in English 1301, you're going to see some of the same slides that I used in that course. However, we're going to take things a couple steps further. So some of this might be a refresher for you from 1301, but I guarantee you're going to learn some new skills, new tricks that are really going to help you not just write your Unit 7 final essay, but pretty much any essay that you come across in the future. So that's our main objective. The three credible sources there at the end. You guys already have that planned out from what you've done so far. You've already got that outline built, so you know the general trajectory of where you're intending to take your final paper. But if we look at the instructions here, it's going to be laid out very similar to this. There's going to be a particular organization to the essay. You're going to have a title page and a reference page, of course. Again, I'm not touching on any APA formatting in this class because that's something that is assumed you already know at this point, especially from 1301 and also from the weeks leading up to now. So I'm not going to touch APA formatting. If you need a refresher on that, make sure you go to that tools for your toolbox, setting yourself up for success post, that link that's at the very top of the classroom. You can find APA related sources there if you need assistance there. Now, what you'll see here is we have an introduction, body paragraphs, a counter argument, and then a conclusion paragraph. And you don't have to necessarily organize this exactly in order, even though the rubric says or the instructions say it should be in this order. I'm going to teach you a couple different ways you can order this to maximize your persuasiveness to make the most of your argument. Now, what are the goals here? Like, what are we going to do? Well, the general strategy here is your paragraphs are going to be about 6 to 7 sentences each, and they should be laser focused. There should be no wasted space. If you think of your favorite movies, TV shows, your favorite books, you're going to notice that they have an economy of words, or there's no wasted movement, there's no wasted space. Everything means something, and that's how you want to craft your paragraphs. You want every single sentence to mean something. Um, and we're going to go into each of these in depth, but having a strong hook, a strong thesis are going to be essential for that introduction. Your body paragraph, there's going to have to be three here. Um, and what your goal is to expand on your X, Y, and Z. We're going to refresh on what that means when we go to the thesis statement. But remember, if you use the thesis statement formula I talked about in Unit 2 that I always harp on, you're going to have a built-in rebuttal component, and you're also going to have that XYZ expanded on the end of it, and that's going to make setting this paper up a whole lot easier. Your counter argument, so that's one or more paragraphs, 6 to 7 sentences, and the goal is to demonstrate that objectivity, that objective lens that shows that you're unbiased and that you researched to find out and you didn't research to prove. And then your conclusion, 5 to 6 sentences. The key here is just talking about some highlights and not adding new information. One thing I kind of like to talk about when it comes to the writing process and particularly body paragraphs and intros and conclusions is you think of it as a football game. So the introduction is kind of like the pregame warm up all the way up to the coin toss. So at this point, you're really not arguing your case just yet. You're just introducing maybe some of your key players that are going to show up later on. And then the body and the counter, that's kind of like your offensive and defensive cycles throughout the game where you're actually trying to score points and you're actually trying to stop the opponent. And that's where the game is played. That's where your outside sources can really shine. And then when you get to the conclusion, the game is over at this point. This is like your post game interviews, talking to the press afterwards, looking at the highlights of key moments that happened during the game. And you're not adding new information. You're not sending the kicker onto the field 15 minutes after the game to try to kick the game-winning field goal because that's just weird. So that's kind of where we're heading with this particular PowerPoint. Now, quick refresher: thesis statements and outlines. I'm not going to go through this verbatim again because a lot of you guys have already built very good thesis statements. However, if the thesis statement is something that you still need work with, or maybe you want to revise it a little bit to help you write your paper a little bit more effectively, definitely just take a picture of this slide, and particularly note that top section here, that even though opposing point of view, my stance is nevertheless important because X, Y, and Z. And I always refer to that X, Y, and Z when it comes to your body paragraphs. And if you hear me saying that, this is what I'm relaying it back to, the thesis statement and the outline. Now, if we're going to look at an introduction and break it down into its simplest form for this argumentative essay, this is roughly what we're going to come up with. This is 6 sentences that are laser focused and everything has a particular meaning. And if you want, you can follow this exactly with your introductions for this class and for future classes. The key here, though, is that we are writing an argumentative essay. So these antagonistic sentences are important. But before I get ahead of myself, let's just start from the top and work our way through. So we have a hook sentence. This is going to be something that pulls your readers into your essay in a meaningful way, something insightful. You don't want to start with something super boring, super general, super obvious. That sweepingly broad statement that lacks substance, that's kind of like your from the beginning of time, or, it's human nature to blah, blah, blah. You start just super wide, and then it takes you 5 sentences to start narrowing down your topic, and you've already lost half your readers because, why state the obvious in the beginning? So I'll give you some tips on that a little later, how to help you craft a better hook sentence. But just know for now, you want to capture your readers. And then you have 2 contextual building sentences. This is when you start narrowing down the picture. This is when you start focusing, honing in on what you're actually going to be discussing in the paper. And it's not a bad idea to introduce some of the key players, those key outside sources, but don't go into depth just yet. Just mention them in passing. Um, this is the strength, this is the weakness type of gig. We're not going into depth just yet. This is kind of like, again, football metaphor. This is like announcing your key players to the field, and introducing them to the media, saying, hey, keep an eye out for this player, keep an eye out for this matchup. And then you have these two antagonistic sentences. And this is really important with a strong introduction, especially for argumentative essays, because immediately you demonstrate to your readers, hey, you did your research and you know the opposing argument just as well as you know your own. So that means you actually do know what you're talking about. You're not just going into this cherry picking evidence. You're not just picking all these sources that just agree with what you say. Um, you're coming into this knowing that, hey, there are different points of views, there's different perspectives, they have their strengths, and I'm acknowledging that. But ultimately, what you're going to do is have that, however, that even so. So, we go back to the thesis statement. You have that even though transition. That is a rebuttal transition. So ultimately, what you do is you set it up and then you negate it right away. So you have that even so, you acknowledge your antagonistic perspective, and then you postulate your stance, and you go beyond that and add that X, Y, and Z to really make it a strong statement. Um, and if we're going to visualize this particular effect down here, it's going to look kind of like a slingshot. You have this tension, 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 then you have a release. That tension is that antagonistic sentence. Antagonistic sentence. You're pulling it back, and then you let that momentum, that controlled release of that thesis statement, kick your paper into motion. And just like a slingshot, the more controlled you are with these antagonistic sentences, the more controlled you are with your transitional words and setting up that thesis statement, the more accurate your shot is ultimately going to be. And what you want to avoid is reckless, completely reckless, not anticipating these rebuttals, just going into it, cherry picking evidence, attacking the straw man. You're going to have zero control over your entire argument and the trajectory of your paper. So, Newton's third law, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So that's kind of why we add these rebuttals into our paper, because it gives us momentum and it gives us elasticity in the movement of our ideas, and it makes us more credible at the end of the day. So, looking at some tactical considerations when it comes to introductions, we have that carefully crafted hook sentence. And if you're the kind of writer that takes a little while to get your ideas onto the page, maybe you have that blank page syndrome where you have that writer's block and you're like, I don't know where to start. So you just start typing. Hey, that's perfectly fine. Just recognize that for what it is. And if that's you, usually it's your second or third sentence that's actually going to be your hook sentence. And it's as simple as going back and revising your work and rereading it later on, maybe with some fresh eyes. Give yourself an hour or two, or maybe a day. Come back and be like, be an honest critic of your own work. Maybe you'll look back and be like, yeah, that hook sentence kind of sucks, but that second sentence is pretty good. So I'm just going to get rid of that first sentence completely, and chalk it up as what it is. So if you need to do that, don't be afraid to make those omissions. Most of the time when you're making revisions, you're looking to cut words anyway. You're looking to cut extra phrases and fluffy things that don't add any substance anyway. So sometimes that could be a whole sentence, and that's perfectly fine. Show your sources early, but don't go into depth yet. Just like the football metaphor, right? We're not going to stretch ourselves thin and just go all out during the pregame warmup, because you're not going to have anything left for the game. So save your high powered evidence, your statistics, any of those, game-changing uh, sources that you might have, save those for the body paragraphs because that's the purpose of them. The body paragraphs are designed in a way for you to introduce your outside sources and explain them, and that's where they can really shine. The introduction is not the time or place for them. Give your opposition a fair voice. Again, don't present those one-sided arguments. In this argumentative essay, it's important to have that antagonistic sentence, and I would prefer two of them. That way, you really can build that tension and that slingshot before you just launch your thesis statement. Um, so, yes, demonstrate your expertise by having that fair voice. Avoid signpost phrases. I didn't knock anyone for this during the last couple assignments. However, if I do see this in the final essay, I'll end up taking some points off, just because these signpost phrases are weak transitions into your thesis statement, because oftentimes students will use this transitional phrase in lieu of a thesis statement. And I want you to avoid that. I don't want you to create mediocre transitions into mediocre uh, thesis statements, because ultimately what it's going to do, it's going to set your paper up for a mediocre movement of ideas. All of these things are related, and it all starts with that strong thesis statement and that strong introduction. Now, at the bottom, I know a lot of you guys have already done quite a bit of research, but if you do feel like you do need to balance out your perspective, balance out your argument, find another source or two, um, I would highly recommend thinking in terms of, the past, present, and future tense, and try to balance them equally. Don't fixate on just one or two of them. You kind of want to pay attention to all of them, and you want your research to appeal to each of them. So, for example, if you're kind of stuck in the past tense and you're thinking forensically about everything, like what happened, why did it happen, and you're digging into all those details, well, you might miss what's right in front of you. Those real world, real time observations. What is happening right now? And then, of course, if you're stuck in the past and the present and you're not looking towards the future, you might not see the projected data, like what's to come, where is this all heading. So if you just kind of fixate on just one of these, you're going to lose out. You're going to have tunnel vision. You're not going to be able to see the others. So, if that clicks with you guys, and maybe you're reflecting on your research right now and you're thinking, oh, shoot, maybe I am missing something. Maybe I am missing that, uh, you know, that appeal to the future tense. What is the projected data saying? Like, what is supposed to be happening? What is the trend? Or you might be like, I haven't done any real time observations. I have no idea what's going on right now. So that could be like including current events even in your paper. Um, so just things to keep in mind. Things to keep in mind. Now, body paragraphs, moving on. So we're going to close the door on introductions and we're moving on. So the general strategy of a body paragraph is essentially developing one main idea through a series of related sentences. And guess what? I love football, and I'm going to carry this metaphor again. So just like when your team has the ball, you have one drive to try to score points, and it's through a series of related plays, right? You pass the ball, you can run the ball, whatever. Um, so that's kind of how a paragraph is developed. It's one main idea, series of related sentences with the goal to move your ideas from one position to another. Um, the first sentence is typically the topic sentence. You'll hear me refer to that quite often over the next couple slides. Um, and the important thing is with a paragraph, it's divided into three sections: a beginning and a middle and an end. And it's almost useful to think of a body paragraph as a mini essay in and of itself, where the topic sentence is like a mini thesis statement, and the end of a paragraph is kind of like a mini conclusion. And we'll go over that in the next couple slides. But most importantly, that paragraph should easily trace back to the thesis, which is why I often say, like, your topic sentence should address your reason X, your reason Y, your reason Z, and so forth. Now, if we're going to break down that body paragraph into its simplest form, this is about what we're going to get. I have 6 sentences here, but you could go more than this. There's really no hard and fast rule when it comes to body paragraphs and how long they can be. Because ultimately, as long as you remain true to that topic sentence, everything else that follows, as long as it easily relates back to it, there's no reason why you can't continue and have 10, 11, 12 sentences in a paragraph. The key is noticing that when you shift away from the original topic sentence and you start talking about something new, that's a signal for you to break that paragraph and begin a new one. But real quick, let's kind of walk through this. We'll talk about it, and then I'll give you a couple really awesome strategies that you can use that break this down into even simpler form than how it's expressed here. So, sentence one, that's your topic sentence. That's your reason X, Y, or Z. You can have a contextual building sentence. Just like in the introduction, you kind of want to build some background to what your topic's going to be about, or exactly what you're trying to prove, even. Sentence three, this is your outside resource. This is your illustration. So you're going to introduce your statistics, your direct quotes. Maybe you paraphrase or summarize an outside source. Maybe this is an OSHA regulation. Whatever it is, right? You're going to introduce that outside source somewhere in the middle. And after you introduce that outside source, you're going to follow up with an explanation. You're going to clarify how that source is meaningful to your topic sentence, or how it's relevant and meaningful to your thesis statement. Because the evidence alone doesn't necessarily explain to your readers, why it's important. Because ultimately, what you're doing, you're not just regurgitating the information that you find from these outside sources. Your goal is to synergize it in a way where you're starting to create new connections that previously weren't explored, right? You're arguing a new case, and what you have to say is important and meaningful. So don't just regurgitate what the outside sources say. Make sense of it in a way that adds something new that can ignite change, perhaps. And now you can have a second illustration and explanation if you so choose. So this is kind of why I say you can continue going down this path, have 7, 8, 9, 10 sentences, because this illustration, explanation of the illustration, this is a recursive loop. You can do this as many times as you want, as long as it's relevant to the topic sentence. So if you have multiple pieces of evidence, you can have multiple sentences explaining that evidence and how you make sense of it. And then when you're ready to, you kind of exhaust the idea and you lose some traction, you can have that concluding remark. This would be like a mini conclusion sentence for this paragraph. You wrap things up, tie it back to the thesis or to the topic sentence, and then you can move on to the next one. Now, with these body paragraphs, we have a bunch of different strategies we can talk about. ICE is probably the simplest one, and it stands for introduce, cite, and explain. So if you're in the heat of writing and you're just trying to get your ideas down, you're like, I don't want to memorize everything that Professor Reeder talked about on that one slide. We're just talking about the explanation of the illustration and whatnot. Well, that's what these are for. Here's ICE. You introduce the topic. So you introduce your X, Y, or Z. Now you cite. You bring in that outside source. You use that quote, paraphrase, summarize, whatever. And then you explain it. And you can repeat that cite, explain as many times as you need to. You can have a recursive loop between the two, and then you can move on to the next paragraph. So that's the ICE method. We also have the sandwich method, and I like this one. I like sandwiches. And there's a couple reasons why I like the sandwich method. Obviously, just like I mentioned before with the strategies of the body paragraphs, you're always going to have an opening, a middle, and a closing. So this is the top bun. This is the meat, the vegetables, all the good stuff in the middle. And down here is that bottom bun. And of course, if you're a sandwich connoisseur, then you know that the layering of a sandwich matters and the quality of the ingredients matter, right? We're not just grabbing, the stale bread that's been in the back of the bread drawer that might have some mold on it. We're not just grabbing at the first thing that we see. Hopefully, if we're going to take pride in the sandwich that we're going to build, maybe we'll go to a nice bakery, get some fresh bread, right? Take pride in our work. Maybe we're going to make our own bread, and that's also cool, right? And we're not going to settle just for your run of the mill bologna sandwich here with nothing on it, right? We're, definitely don't give me bologna sandwiches with your Unit 7 essay because I don't want to read bologna sandwiches. But the quality of your ingredients, the quality of your outside sources matter. The quality of your topic sentence matters. How you introduce your reason X, your reason Y matters a lot. And it should be, comparable to that closing sentence too. How you close a paragraph should be done in a high quality way where you don't just, leave the bottom piece of bread off and you only have, three-quarters of a sandwich. You need to complete that paragraph. Your sandwich is a work of art, right? We want that thick roast beef sandwich in here, right? That's what we want. High quality ingredients. Now, moving on, we've got some other methods that we could talk about here. So maybe the ice method didn't stick with you. Maybe the sandwich method is not your thing. Um, Again, what we're looking here for is the strategy is generally the same with all of these. It's just what's going to stick with you. What are you going to remember when you're actually sitting down and writing? Because oftentimes when you're sitting down and you're writing, you're not thinking about, oh, I got to use the peel method, I got to use the sandwich method. You're just thinking about, I need to get these words on the page and I need to move on. And if that's where we're at, right? So if you just stop for a moment and think, okay, I need to get these words out. Uh, Let me see, how am I supposed to structure this? Okay, peel method, cool. So then you know kind of how to layer your paragraph, or with the sandwich method, you know how to layer that sandwich of your particular talking points in that body paragraph. So here, the peel method stands for point, explain, evidence, link. And again, you can see the similarities to the previous slides. We have our topic sentence, that's our X, Y, or Z. We have our explanation and evidence, and we have a recursive loop between them where you're constantly introducing connections to evidence, you're showcasing the relevance of it, and you're explaining it. You're going back and forth in this recursive loop where you go from this, you have this movement of generality in the beginning and you move to specific, and then when you have that specificity defined, you go back and clarify it, and then when you have exhausted that idea, then you start transitioning to that next paragraph. For my fire and EMS guys in here, you probably know the SOAP method. SOAP method, well, the SOAP stands for Subject Objective Assessment and Plan. And this is very commonly used for patient care reports in the world of EMS, medicine, fire. So whenever we run medical calls, we have to write a narrative of events that happened at that medical call. So with a little bit of imagination, we can stretch this concept and apply it to academic writing. um, and if that's kind of how your brain operates and you're thinking, you've written, hundreds, if not 1,000 medical reports, and you're thinking SOAP method all the time, every time you sit down to write, well, don't just completely abandon what you know. Just train it in a way where you can apply it to academics. And again, it takes a little bit of imagination, but you can absolutely do it. And this is kind of how. So your subject, you think of that as your X, Y, or Z. Introduce that subtopic that relates to your thesis. Your objective, right? So you clarify the action related to your subject. You can think of that as your how or your what. And your assessment. So unlike the world of EMS and fire, we're not doctors, so we can't provide a diagnosis on scene. We can't pronounce someone dead. Um, so here's kind of like a sharp turn from that. So in the world of academic writing, and after you research your topic and you essentially become, you know, a little bit of an expert on your topic even, you have the freedom to offer an analysis, an evaluation, a judgment. You can provide a diagnosis essentially regarding your topic sentence and your action. And you can explain the why, which is a lot of freedom that we're not used to um, when it comes to the traditional SOAP method in writing patient care reports. You actually have the freedom to provide a true assessment according to what you really believe. Of course, you want to express it as objectively and accurately as possible, but there is a lot more freedom when it comes to academic writing in that sense. And then you have the plan. So you can think of this as ending that paragraph, that concluding remark. You could offer a solution statement if you wanted, or something that links everything together, like a nice little causation. And then you start connecting, bridging to that next paragraph. Now, here's the meat and potatoes of what we're really going to be talking about here. We're going to go into transitions now. So at this point, we kind of talked about in general the structure of the introduction, the structure of the body paragraphs, and that counter argument paragraph that we talked about in the beginning of the PowerPoint. It's going to be structured very much like a normal body paragraph. But the transitions, this is what's going to make everything unique. Again, because we have an argumentative essay here, and we need to have control over the movement of our ideas. So we're going to go into all of this in a lot more depth in the coming slides. But right now, what I want you to kind of think of is the transition out of a paragraph usually begins in the topic sentence of the new one. Effective transitions help you volley your ideas back and forth, and I've got some good visualizations for you for that. And simple transitions are almost always better than crazy ones. And usually having one is a lot better than having no transition at all. So very common transitions that you'll see is a even so, likewise, furthermore, though, still. These are all very simple transitions, but they all mean different things. Even so, that's a very strong rebuttal. That means like everything that you wrote in the previous paragraph is in jeopardy. Even so. You could even say despite. That's a strong rebuttal transition. It sets it up for a very stark contrast. Um, Still, that's kind of like a medium-ish rebuttal. Still, that means like everything you wrote before it, and then you kick off the new paragraph with still. That's like you're not completely rebuttaling them, but maybe you're going to poke a hole in their argument. And though works very much in the same way. Now, we're not always going to have those rebuttaling paragraphs coming directly after our body paragraph. Sometimes we'll go from reason X, reason Y, reason Z, we'll go straight through it. And all of those will be reinforcing each other. So you might have a likewise or a furthermore, right? Likewise, introduce reason X. Furthermore, introduce reason Y. Those are pretty strong transitional words to kind of segue into your topic sentences. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're controlling the flow of our ideas. So here's a methodical movement. and this is the one that if you look at the instructions for the Unit 7 final essay, this is kind of how it's suggested that you organize your paper. So you have the thesis statement, it sets the essay in motion, it's very methodical. Um, we basically create an offensive cycle. So it's like, boom, we're immediately on offense. We're going to argue reason X. Boom, we're going to have another strong drive. We're going to talk about reason why. And you could use some of those transitional phrases like likewise, furthermore, in addition, in that topic sentence, because that's a transition that supports a new offensive cycle. Essentially, you're just advancing your topic, advancing your topic, advancing your topic. Now, the big downfall with a lot of new writers is that you advance your topic, advance your topic, advance your topic, and then you go straight to the conclusion, and there's no rebuttal. So ultimately, it's just hitting the heavy bag. You're wailing on the heavy bag. You're attacking the straw man, and there's no defensive cycle. There's no rebuttal. Um, there's no chance for the opposing point of views to get a word in at all. So ultimately, what we do, and this is how it's suggested in the instructions, is to have that rebuttal paragraph at the end here. So some of the transitional words and phrases that we can use when we start that graph, even so, still, on the contrary, um, others argue, and then you could start citing the opposition. So that is a signal uh, that transitions to a defensive cycle where all of a sudden you're rebuttaling the paragraphs that you previously discussed, right? Now, with an argumentative essay, though, we're not going to let the rebuttal win, because we're going to start our conclusion with a very strong transitional word like nevertheless or regardless or ultimately, even so. We're not going to start it with in conclusion because that's super weak and that's a signpost. But we can use these other meaningful transitions because they mean something. When you start a paragraph with nevertheless or regardless or even so, you're directly volleying ideas with the previous paragraph. So here we have an advancement, an advancement, an advancement, all offensive cycles, and then we have a defensive cycle. That rebuttal comes back. And then we have a rebuttal to the rebuttal, and that's how we can conclude. Now, that's a very methodical movement between paragraphs, and it's kind of like volleyball with a bump set spike. It's like reason X, reason Y, reason Z, and then you have that defensive cycle. So you're essentially setting your paper up to score more persuasive points with your readers. But you could have a more fast pace movement between paragraphs where the rebuttals are weaved in their own paragraphs as you go. This is a more advanced technique that you could probably pull off later on. You might be able to pull it off for the Unit 7 essay if you're ambitious enough. But this is something to keep in mind, that the methodical movement where it's offensive cycle, offensive cycle, offensive cycle, and then you add that little rebuttal towards the end. You don't have to do that. You have other options as well. And in this particular example, we have that thesis statement, sets the paper into motion, of course, and that's essentially your first offensive cycle. And then you have reason X right here, which is also advancing your stance, another offensive cycle. However, after you introduce reason X, you go to a rebuttal. So you immediately follow up a response to reason X rather than waiting until the end of the paper. So now you kind of have this back and forth, offensive cycle, defensive cycle, offensive cycle, defensive cycle. And it's kind of like if you were watching a very fast paced football game where one team gets the ball and they score fairly quick. The other team gets the ball, they score back and tie the game up. It's one of those kind of movements. And if we were going to visualize it, um, well, before I even get to the visualization, what makes this work? What makes this movement between paragraphs work and make it not seem so choppy is these transitional phrases that you can kick off these paragraphs with. So, on the contrary, okay, we know this is in response to the previous paragraph. Nevertheless, okay, we know that's in response to the previous paragraph. In contrast, or still, we know that's a response. So we have like a call and a response, a call and a response, and that's kind of how we carry through that particular essay. But again, what makes it work are those transitional words set up in such a way where you can have control over your ideas and you're not just jumping from this to that to this to that without any sort of clarity. Now, if we're going to look at this as a visualization, right, this more fast-paced movement of ideas where it's, reason X, the next paragraph rebuttal. Then you talk about reason Y, next paragraph rebuttal. It's kind of like a fast ping pong match. You're not bump setting and spiking anymore. You're just out swinging, trying to be faster than the opposition. And it's a very, interesting way to write a paper, honestly. And then when you get to the conclusion paragraph, that's when you can have that definitive, ultimately type of message where, regardless of everything that the opposition said, what I said still rings true. You essentially circle it back to your original thesis statement. Now, you can also have transitions inside of paragraphs as well, and I would highly recommend doing so to weave your ideas together. Um, and help you build clear, concise, and easy to read paragraphs. So if we're looking here at introducing an outside source, for example, according to, that's one of the most common, easiest to remember ways to transition into introducing an outside source. So like according to Smith 2023, or according to whoever. And all of these are fairly interchangeable. They're not exactly the same, they have subtle differences, but they all serve the same purpose, and that's ultimately to introduce your outside sources to your reader. So this would be your illustration. Um, and here, with your clarification, this could be your explanation of your illustration. So this is your recursive cycle. You introduce an outside source, and then you explain what that source means in your own words. You clarify, you put it another way, you synthesize it with your ultimate message, right? You look for that synergy. You look for how it's meaningful to your topic sentence and to your thesis statement. You're not just regurgitating what they have to say. And then when you get to that concluding statement, right, we've got those miniature conclusions for our body paragraphs. That's when you could use a transitional phrase like thus, therefore, consequently. Ultimately, what that tells your readers is, ultimately, right, therefore, thus, everything that I said previously supports my thesis statement in such a way, right? So these little phrases, they might not mean much, but they add so much more clarity to what you're saying. And if we're going to look at this again in the structure of the body paragraph, very simply, you have that opening, you have that middle, and then you have that concluding statement. Uh, when you have that topic sentence, uh, when you're building that topic sentence, you're always going to be relating it to that previous paragraph. So reinforcements, so if you're going with a more methodical approach and you're bump setting, spiking your ideas, you can use likewise, similarly, furthermore, addition. Um, and that's how you can introduce your X, Y's, and Z's. When you have a topic sentence that is a rebuttal or a rebuttal to a rebuttal, that's when you can use even so, on contrary, on the other hand, still, though, and there's a million others that you can choose from. But all of those help you connect the bridge to the previous paragraph and to the paragraph before that, and ultimately all the way back to the thesis statement. Now, when you have your explanation and illustration cycle, you have that according to Smith, for example, Smith demonstrates, and then you explain it in other words to clarify within the context of reason X, and then you can repeat that recursive loop as many times as you need to until you exhaust your ideas, and then you can move to that concluding statement. And common transitional words into a concluding statement that signal to your readers very clearly that, hey, I'm about to wrap up this paragraph. Thus, consequently, therefore, and a million others. These are just the most common ones. So, with all of this, with all these transitions, what we're doing is we're creating more control over our writing voice and the movement of our ideas in particular. We're not letting the writing control us. We're not letting the writing process control us. We have our hands on the wheel and we're steering ourselves where we want to take it. Now, with tactical considerations, I'm not going to go too much in depth here because this is more of a refresher from 1301. But ultimately, what you want to do is use high quality ingredients when you're building these body paragraph sandwiches, right? Don't give me opinions, give me facts, right? Don't give me that plain bologna sandwich or that slimy turkey that's from, you know, Oscar Mayer, I think. Yeah, don't give me that slimy turkey, right? Give me some nice, you know, deli meat, or give me some roast beef, it's fresh. Give me those fresh ingredients, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the best quality statistics, the highest quality quotes, um, the most relevant facts, right? We don't want to just add anything in there. You could have, the best tasting peanut butter on the planet, the best peanut butter, but you're not going to spread that peanut butter on, just any random sandwich that you make because it's just not going to work, right? So don't force things that aren't meant to be there. Everything should have synergy with each other. And just like we talked about in Unit 2, you want to use a range and variety of sources to help you build a strong argument and build a strong paragraph. And the same thing applies here. So when you're building these paragraphs, have a nice, well balanced approach to how you build them and how you advance your ideas. Now, moving on, we've got the conclusion. And remember, football game analogy. What is the conclusion? It's the post game show. So at this point, the game is over. There's no more offensive and defensive cycles. We're just looking at the recap. We're looking at the highlights. We're talking to the press. We're talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the particular paper. Maybe we're going to look for opportunities for the future. Maybe there's a need for future research in a particular area because maybe there's a gap in the literature where you couldn't find something, and maybe more scholarly research needs to be put forth in that particular area. And you can also look at potential concerns in the conclusion where maybe you notice an alarming trend. You have that forward thinking, that future tense is in your mind, right? You're looking at the future, and maybe there's a concern there, or maybe there's an opportunity there. Regardless, the conclusion is not the time or place to introduce those, new outside sources. It's not the time or place to further advance your topic. You're not sending the kicker onto the field to kick the game-winning field goal, the morning after the game finished. We're not doing that. Essentially, what you're going to do is recap that thesis. You're going to talk about those highlights, share some final thoughts, and then leave a lasting impression, something thought provoking, something that can compel your readers to act on behalf of what you're arguing, potentially make meaningful change towards what you're arguing. Um, and moving on here, some tactical considerations. Avoid signposting. So, in conclusion, is the worst possible way you can transition into a conclusion. There's a bajillion different ways we could transition into a conclusion that are light years better. And we've talked about them already. Any of those rebuttals or any of those reinforcements, those kind of transitions actually mean something. When you say in conclusion, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't signal anything. You could remove it from the sentence and it won't change the meaning of the sentence whatsoever. So, when in doubt, if you can omit something for the sake of concision, it's almost always better to get rid of it. Just kind of like I talked about the hook sentence in the beginning. If you could get rid of it because it's a sucky way to start a paper, then get rid of it. There's no shame, no harm done. Um, Now, moving on, we got that new information. Again, don't send the kicker on the field the next morning to try to win the game. That's just weird. Your conclusion, it functions like a conclusion, post game interview. That's it. And then you have maintaining an objective voice. So, what this means is don't write in the first or second person. um, I, me, my, you, your, our, we, I believe, I think, I feel, in my opinion, all of those things. And really, these should be omitted from the entire paper, not just the conclusion. Because essentially, if you think of your argument as a life raft, every time you use the word I, or every time you use the word I think, or I feel, or in my opinion, it's like poking small holes in the bottom of your life raft. Like they're not going to be detrimental right away, but you're slowly sinking your ship. You're slowly drowning your argument in opinionated and biased language. So you want to get rid of that completely from your vocabulary. And then, of course, be concise. So 5 to 7 sentences is pretty ideal. You could go 4 sentences if you needed to. I wouldn't recommend going beyond 7 sentences, but really you just kind of want to neatly wrap things up and transition out, leave those final impressions, those final thoughts, and save your voice to argue another day. Now, if we're going to revisit that main goal, all right, so why are we even talking about this? Ultimately, what we're going to do, we're going to take that outline that you wrote and we're going to transform it into fully developed, high quality body paragraphs, at least three. And you're also going to write that counter argument. So you can do a more methodical approach, like the instructions for the papers indicate, where you can have, reason X, reason Y, reason Z, counter argument, and then go to the conclusion. Or you can opt for that more fast paced, reason X, rebuttal, reason Y, rebuttal, reason Z, rebuttal, and have more of that ping pong battle. Either way, I'm perfectly okay with either approach. The important thing is you got to have that counter argument in there somewhere. And again, if you use that strong thesis statement formula that we talked about in the beginning, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to kind of make sense of this whole assignment. Um, and revisiting the goal again, so we have those 6 to 7 laser focused sentences, 3 paragraphs, 6 to 7 sentences each. You expand on your X, Y, and Z. You have that counter argument, 1 or more paragraphs. Again, you're giving your opposition a fair voice. You're not playing dummy defense here. You're actually giving it your best shot to, rebuttal against your own argument, just as your opposition would if they didn't agree with you. You have to give it a fair shot. And then you have that conclusion. And if you want, you can look back on all these slides. And if it helps you put together your essay, you can literally just follow along, be like, all right, I need to create this body paragraph. So let me go back to this PowerPoint. Let me look at some of those strategies. Let me look at that anatomy of the body paragraph. Let me break it down, and then just write your sentences, very slowly and methodically, writing one at a time, looking at the PowerPoint, write another one, and then create it systematically in that sense as well, rather than just trying to write everything down all at once as fast as you can. It'll take maybe a little bit longer, but ultimately, I think what you'll take away from it is that you'll have a greater understanding of what all this stuff means. And then when you go into those higher level courses, you can apply it with a little bit less effort in a sense, where you're like, okay, I already know how I'm going to structure this body paragraph. Oh, I already know how to transition into a rebuttal paragraph, and I already know how to transition into rebuttal of the rebuttal paragraph. And these things will become more natural to you. And now that is the end of the PowerPoint. And we did quite well on time. Look at that, 6:55. Not too shabby. So, um, do you guys have any questions? Any questions at all? I'm going to take a look at the chat. Let's see. Yes, Eli, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint. Um, Essentially, after you complete the little assignment where it says I attended the live lecture, I will send you the PowerPoint in the feedback so you can review it whenever. I'm not going to post an announcement with it because I want the students that didn't attend to actually watch the video. Of course, of course. Do you guys have any questions? Anything at all? I know we covered a ton of information. Yes, so there will be a recording of it, Michael. It usually takes about 30 minutes after I end the recording and end the session. It just takes a little minute for the video to upload and process, but it will be available sometime tonight. You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. So if you guys don't have any questions at all, that's perfectly fine. You guys know you can send me a message in the class. You can email me, whatever works for you. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. And you guys are free to go. I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope that it helps you write your Unit 7 paper. And I hope it helps you in your future papers as well. A lot of this crap is going to come back when you're writing those papers in your higher level courses. So you might as well just make a little folder on your desktop and label it 1302 or English 1302. Just throw all this crap in there. Throw the PowerPoint in there, download the recording, throw that in there. Save it for a rainy day because you never know when you might need it. All this stuff will apply in the future. All of it. All the way up to even master level courses, graduate level. All these lessons kind of build on each other, and you know it's all good stuff. It all comes back. All right, you guys have a good night. Thank you. I appreciate your time.